Current thinking says that by 2050, 70% of the world's population will be living in cities. Overcrowding is already becoming a fact of urban life, straining infrastructure and threatening to destabilize urban harmony. What should the city planners and companies do for the cities of the future? Luc van Wassenhove, INSEAD Professor of Technology and Operations Management, joins us now. Luc, thank you for joining me on INSEAD Knowledge. My first question to you is, cities today, especially in the developing world, we're facing unprecedented challenges. Rural populations are migrating to cities. What does this population shift mean to these megacities?
Oh, well, huge challenges. And I think a large degree of being poorly prepared for it. I mean, population growth is fast. And you know, migration to the cities is even faster. So you see all these projections going from, you know, 75% of the population is going to live in cities, urban areas in 2040, 2050. It doesn't really matter whether these things are completely accurate. They're going to create huge tension. There was already an enormous tension on our resources. We're already consuming 2 worlds, if you want, according to some reports. Now, if you put that all in cities, the pressure on the resources is going to become almost impossible. And you know, any resource you can think of, whether it's traffic jams, whether it's electricity, whether it's water, whether it's health, whether it's, you know, education, you name it. Plus, huge vulnerability to crises. Anything happens, it's very difficult to intervene in a city, much more difficult than in a rural area. From a, you know, humanitarian response type of perspective. So big problems, big challenges in the future.
In your case study, you looked at Singapore specifically, but you also mentioned, you know, there needs to be a sort of tried and tested model to follow. Can Singapore be this model, or perhaps, you know, should it be a sort of combination of cities?
Singapore has had the advantage, but also the foresight to realize very early that they didn't have any resources. They just had a small island. So if they wanted to have economic development, they had to make sure that they had a decent environment for people to live in. You cannot attract highly educated people and become a knowledge center if you have a lousy environment. So, you know, they didn't have water, they didn't have energy, they didn't have, you know, etc., etc. So they were forced from the start to include sustainability, you know, not just economic sustainability, because, you know, they understood from the beginning economic sustainability for them was tightly linked to environmental sustainability, and now in the future social sustainability, I think. You know, you cannot, it is not a luxury anymore, given our resource constraints. Sustainability is no longer a luxury, and others are starting to hit that, you know, start to understand that, start to hit those constraints and have to deal with that.
And what about the some examples of good city leadership and good city management, and what sort of things can we learn from the Singapores of this world?
Well, Singapore is a bit of a special case, right? First of all, because historically they were confronted with these constraints, and so they had to integrate them. And they had to make sure that Singapore became a nice place to live for people to come and work there and do business, right? So there was no difference between sustainability in the environmental sense and sustainability in the business development sense for the city and the state, which are the same thing in Singapore.
That's eluded a lot of the megacities. I mean, the Mumbai's, Jakarta's of this world. I mean, why is that the case?
Well, in the big cities like the ones you mentioned, they don't have the resources, right? And very often, unfortunately, they also have very poorly functioning political systems. And I'm not even mentioning corruption, because that might also come into you know, a big part, a big influence. I mean, traditionally, everything that has to do with infrastructure and construction has been something, you know, or waste management has been something that was, you know, cowboy territory or you know, a lot of corruption, a lot of, you know, and it's still the case in many countries. it's impossible to deal with that if you can't change the governance structure, reduce the corruption, and all that.
I guess we could look at two things that Singapore did right. I mean, they had a very centralized approach to the whole thing, but
Indeed.
also its small size, and it might be somewhat a shallow perspective, or maybe not, that Singapore's small size enabled it to be well centrally managed and well managed overall. Are they the two things? I mean, is it central management that does the right?
Well, one of the important things when you want to change or plan, if you want, a city for these challenges is somehow you need to have control over land, right? You know, you can't have these slums popping up with 2 million people without any control. So Singapore had control over land. They just, you know, rearranged the land and then decided what to develop where. So, and that, of course, is related to a centralized government. And so, you know, that was, in a way, an advantage for them. And that's a big disadvantage for many other countries or cities. And one of the major issues after the earthquake in Port-au-Prince in Haiti was that a lot of the titles of land ownership disappeared. And so how can you reconstruct the city and rebuild things better if you don't know who the land belongs to? You know, you think about the legal issues, and that's one of the reasons, and many other reasons, one of the reasons why, you know, 2 years after the earthquake in Haiti, rebuilding is still largely non-existing. So you need the control over the land ownership. Centralized government obviously helps you. And then you need not just a centralized government, but you need excellence in government and governance. Another thing is Singapore has been very smart about, right? I mean, some of the best paid jobs and some of the smartest people in Singapore are with government.
I guess we couldn't suggest then that central management is always the answer, because in countries like India or China, for example, what happens at the central level and what happens at the local level can often be a very different thing.
Yes. But again, I think there will be a tendency for central governments to give more autonomy to cities. And then if you add to that technology and social pressures, using, you know, the technology and the social media, there may be, you're just being positive, there may be positive pressures on the politicians of those cities to do something. Now there's still the issue, that is to develop a longer term plan rather than, you know, chaotic management of the cities, right? Now there may still be the issue of resources, right? So where are the resources going to come from? I don't know, maybe business can help by helping to create business which would generate economic resources. But that's a question mark. There's certainly a role for business to be played there.
And one thing we talked about a little bit earlier was that Singapore's done a good job in its talent management, and a lot of the best minds are in
Yes.
government.
Yes.
And one of the things they've done that's especially interesting is that they managed to sort of
Yes.
rotate people around.
They do.
And I mean, how can this be applied elsewhere?
What is especially true in many of our Western societies is that we have been putting things in silos, right? There's education, and then there's something else. And so, you know, you have all these ministries and all these administrations, and they're very much silos. And so if you start talking about the issues that we're talking about, it is very much cross-disciplinary. You know, it touches everything. Now, if it has to be cross-disciplinary, you have to have ministries working together, which is, you know, really an effort that's being done in Singapore, but not necessarily in many other countries that I see. You also have to have people who understand the different issues, so hence the rotation of these talents through all the ministries in Singapore, so they understand each other's concerns when they work together in cross-disciplinary groups from different ministries. Right? Their incentives are based on working together. And the results they achieve from working together.
Great. Well, Luke, thank you very much for joining us on INSEAD Knowledge.
It's a pleasure.